"You're coming with me," said the cowboy after he pointed his gun at her first. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the rugged landscape. The dry, dusty road stretched on endlessly, winding through the barren wilderness of the West. It was a world where survival was the only rule, where lawmen and outlaws alike roamed the land, and where the wind carried whispers of both hope and despair. The cowboy walked with steady, measured steps, his boots kicking up the dry dirt as he moved. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and filled with a hardened resolve. The long hours of the day had taken their toll, but he was used to the heat, the isolation, and the harshness of the world he lived in. He was a man of few words, a loner who didn't trust easily, and for good reason. Round. In a place like this, trust was a rare commodity, and most people had learned to rely only on themselves. The cowboy had learned that lesson well. His past was filled with memories of betrayal, loss, and the bitter sting of regret. But today his focus was not on the past. Today he had a job to do. As he walked along the road, his eyes scanned the horizon. He had been tracking someone for days now, a woman who had been on the run. He didn't know why she was fleeing, and he didn't particularly care. But the reasons didn't matter in this unforgiving land. What mattered was that she was in his sights, and he was determined to find her. He wasn't a bounty hunter, but he had his own reasons for pursuing her. The details were unclear, but something about her had caught his attention. Perhaps it was the way she had been traveling alone, the way she had kept to herself, hiding in the shadows.
It didn't take long for him to pick up her trail.
He had been following her for miles, tracking the signs she had left behind, footprints in the dust, broken branches, and the occasional discarded item. As the day wore on, he could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him. He wasn't used to having company on the trail, and he didn't care much for it. But today, something felt different. The air was thick with tension, and the cowboy couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. And then, as the sun dipped lower, he saw her. She appeared out of nowhere, stepping out from behind a clump of dry brush. At first the cowboy thought she was just another mirage, a trick of the heat, but as she came into full view he knew it was her, the woman he had been tracking. She stood still for a moment, her eyes scanning the horizon, as if she sensed his presence before he even moved. The cowboy's hand instinctively went to the handle of his gun. It wasn't fear that drove him. It was caution. In a world like this, it was always best to be prepared for the worst. The woman took a step forward, her gaze never leaving the horizon. She was tall, with dark hair that fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Her clothes were worn and faded, but there was a quiet strength about her. The cowboy could tell that she had been through hardships, just like him. There was a certain grace in her movements, even in the midst of the unforgiving landscape. The moments stretched on, each of them sizing up the other, neither willing to make the first move. The cowboy knew he had the upper hand. He had the gun, the experience, and the advantage of surprise. But there was something about the woman that kept him on edge. Something in the way she held herself, like she wasn't afraid of him. Most people would have been. "Stop right there," he said, his voice rough, a low growl that carried on the wind. The woman froze, her body tensing as she turned slowly to face him. Her eyes, dark and intense, met his, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The air between them crackled with the unspoken understanding that this encounter would define the course of their lives. The cowboy's grip tightened on the gun. Breaths. I said stop. The woman didn't move. She wasn't afraid. At least she didn't show it. Her gaze never wavered, her stance steady and unyielding. Perhaps it was as if she was waiting for something, perhaps for him to make the first move, or perhaps to see if he would give her a chance to explain herself. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice softer now. There was no point in pretending to be indifferent. He was curious. The woman had piqued his interest, and he couldn't help but wonder what brought her out here, in the middle of nowhere. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the road behind her, as though she was searching for something, or someone. After a moment, she spoke.
"I'm just passing through,"
she said, her voice calm and steady.
"Despite the situation, I'm not looking for trouble."
In this world, no one was just passing through. Everyone had a reason for being here, and it was rarely a good one. But he didn't press her for more details.
He didn't need to. He had a job to do, and it was simple.
He motioned with his gun. "You're coming with me." The words hung in the air, and the woman's eyes widened, just for a second. She wasn't expecting this. She had been prepared for many things, but this was different. She didn't move, didn't say a word, but her eyes flickered to the gun in his hand. Britt. There was no mistaking the seriousness of his intent. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet but laced with an edge of defiance. The cowboy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, closing the distance between them. He wasn't going to wait for her to comply. She would follow him, whether she liked it or not. "Because I said so," he replied, his tone firm. Britt. His eyes never left hers, and for a brief moment he wondered if she would fight back. But the woman just stood there, unmoving, her hands by her sides. The cowboy took another step forward, his boots crunching in the dirt. He could feel the tension between them, like a rope pulled tight, ready to snap. But he wasn't about to back down. He had his own reasons for taking her with him, reasons he wasn't willing to share just yet. The woman took a step back, but not in fear. It was more like she was preparing herself for something. She wasn't going to give in easily, but she wasn't about to make things harder for herself either. The cowboy could see the conflict in her eyes. For a long moment, they stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Then, slowly, the woman nodded. She didn't have much of a choice. Breaths. She could run, but the cowboy would catch her. Or she could go with him, at least for now, and hope that she could find a way out later. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I'm coming." Bay. He knew better than to let his guard down. He didn't trust her. Not yet. And she didn't trust him either. But for now they would walk the same road, two strangers forced to share the same fate. "Move," he said, motioning for her to walk ahead of him. And so, they began their journey together, two souls bound by fate, with no way of knowing where the road would lead them. But one thing was certain. Their lives would never be the same again. The woman walked in front of the cowboy, each step purposeful but careful. The dusty road stretched out before them, the sun sinking lower in the sky, casting the land in an orange glow. The silence between them was heavy, like a thick fog that neither of them dared to break. She had hoped that the cowboy would speak, but he remained quiet, his presence as solid and unyielding as the land around them. For a while they walked in silence, the only sound being the crunch of the cowboy's boots against the earth and the faint rustling of the wind. The woman's mind raced. What was he planning to do with her? Why had he taken her so suddenly? The cowboy had given no explanation, and his silence was only making the tension worse. She had been prepared for danger, for threats, even for violence, but this felt different. This man, though rough and demanding, didn't seem like the type to simply shoot someone without cause. Still, she didn't know what to make of him, and she wasn't about to trust him. Not yet. She glanced over her shoulder at him, catching a glimpse of his profile. His face was weathered, hardened by the years of living on the edge of civilization. There was a ruggedness to him, a kind of toughness that made it clear he had survived much in his life. His eyes, though, were something else, sharp and calculating. But there was something more beneath them. A depth, perhaps, a hint of regret. She wasn't sure, but she could sense it. Brute. He wasn't just a mindless brute. There was a story behind those eyes. Her thoughts wandered back to the road they were on, to the way he had pointed his gun at her with such cold determination. It had happened so quickly. One moment she was walking alone, and the next he was there, a stranger with a gun.
The memory of that moment still made her stomach twist.
She wasn't afraid of guns. She had seen them before, had held one in her hands more than once. But the way he had looked at her, the way he had taken control, it made her feel powerless, vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt in years. She had been running for so long from something, from someone. She had told herself that she wouldn't stop, that she wouldn't let anyone catch her. But now, with this cowboy trailing behind her, she wasn't sure what to do. Should she try to escape again? Or was she better off going along with him, at least for now? The choices seemed limited, and neither was particularly appealing. Her mind drifted to the memories of the life she had left behind. She had once been a different person, someone full of hope, with dreams and aspirations. But that had all changed. She had learned the hard way that in this world survival came at a cost. Trust was a rare commodity, and people who gave it away too easily often found themselves paying a price they couldn't afford. That was why she had left, why she had run. But now, here she was walking beside a man who, for all she knew, could turn out to be more dangerous than anyone she had ever encountered. The cowboy's voice broke through her thoughts, low and firm. "We're not far from camp. There's a place up ahead." She didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to hear her thoughts, didn't need to know what was going on in her head. She wasn't sure why he was telling her this, but she nodded anyway, not trusting herself to speak. Her throat felt tight, as though the weight of the situation had finally caught up with her. They continued walking, the landscape changing as they moved. The road curved around a small hill, revealing a cluster of trees up ahead. The shadows of the trees stretched long in the fading light, and the air felt cooler as they neared the shelter they offered. The cowboy had said it was a camp, but she had no idea what to expect. Would it be a safe place, or would it be another trap? She couldn't tell, but she had learned not to expect much in the way of safety in this world. Breaths as they approached the camp. The cowboy slowed his pace. His hand remained close to his gun, and she could see the careful way he surveyed the area. It was clear that he was no stranger to danger, no stranger to making sure that everything was secure. But she wondered if he trusted anyone, or if his whole life was spent looking over his shoulder, waiting for someone to make a move against him. The camp was simple, just a small fire pit surrounded by rocks and a few scattered supplies. There was a blanket rolled up near the fire, and a saddle resting against one of the nearby trees. The cowboy had clearly been here for a while, alone. The absence of other people told her that much. He gestured for her to sit down by the fire. She hesitated but then obeyed, careful not to make any sudden moves. As she sat down, she noticed that the cowboy moved around the camp with practiced ease. He started a fire, the sparks flying up into the darkening sky as the flames grew higher. It wasn't a large fire, but it was enough to provide warmth and light in the stillness of the night. The woman watched him for a moment, trying to gauge his next move. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the lines etched into his skin, the faint scars that told stories of battles fought and survived. Ray, he wasn't just a cowboy. He was someone who had lived through things, someone who had seen the worst of what the world had to offer. She wasn't sure if she admired him or feared him, but she knew that there was something about him that was undeniably compelling. Finally, he spoke again. "I'm not your enemy." She looked up at him, meeting his gaze. The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time she allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't lying. Breaths. "Then why did you take me?" she asked, her voice steady, though there was a slight tremor beneath the surface. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward a saddle and began to unpack a small bag, pulling out a canteen of water and some dried meat. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. Best. As he sat down opposite her, he passed her the canteen, and she took it without a word, grateful for the small kindness. The water was cool and refreshing, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax. "I have my reasons," he said, his voice quieter now. "I don't expect you to understand them, but they're mine."
"I've been tracking you for a while, and I have to know what you're running from."
She didn't respond right away. The fire crackled, its flames the only sound for a long while. She wasn't sure if she could trust him with the truth, but something about the way he spoke made her feel like he wasn't entirely heartless. Maybe he was just a man trying to make sense of a world that had lost all sense of order, just like everyone else out here. "I don't want trouble," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I'm just trying to get away. I don't need anything from you." The cowboy studied her for a long time, his eyes not unkind but also not full of warmth. "You won't get away from it, but maybe I can help you." "But maybe I can help you. If you tell me what you're running from." The woman didn't respond, but in her heart she knew that this was the beginning of something that could either save her or bring her deeper into the world she had been trying to escape. And as the night grew colder and the fire flickered out, she realized that she had made her choice. She was here for a reason, and whether she liked it or not, she was going to have to trust the cowboy if she had any hope of surviving. The morning came quickly, as it always did in the West, bringing with it a crispness to the air that promised a change in the weather. The night had been quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of animals in the distance. The woman woke first, her body stiff from the hard ground. She had gotten little sleep, her mind restless, as she tried to make sense of her situation. The cowboy, though silent and mysterious, had not treated her poorly, but she knew better than to let her guard down completely. She had been in dangerous situations before, and no one was truly to be trusted out here. She sat up, rubbing her eyes and stretching her legs. The cowboy was already awake, his back turned as he packed up his few belongings. His movements were precise, careful, as though he was preparing for something. She watched him for a moment, unsure of what to say or do. The silence between them had grown more comfortable since last night, but it was still heavy, filled with unspoken words and guarded thoughts. "Morning," she said quietly, her voice breaking the stillness. The cowboy didn't immediately look up, but he nodded. "Morning," he replied, his voice as gruff as always, but there was a hint of something softer beneath it, like he wasn't entirely indifferent to her presence. She stood up, brushing the dust off her clothes. The morning sun was rising higher, casting long shadows across the landscape. Basque, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the vastness of the land around them. It was a place that swallowed people whole, leaving nothing behind but the memory of their existence. Out here, you had to be strong to survive, and weakness could get you killed. As the cowboy finished packing up, he turned toward her, his face set in that familiar, unreadable expression. "We've got a long way to go," he said, his voice serious. "You stay close, and don't make a sound unless I say so." The woman nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The air between them was still thick with uncertainty. She didn't know if she was being taken to safety or if she was being led into something worse. She had learned long ago to be cautious, to question everything, especially when it came to strangers. But there was something about the cowboy that made her pause. He wasn't like the others she had encountered in her travels. There was a quiet strength to him, something that suggested he wasn't just a man of violence and intimidation. Still, she couldn't ignore the fact that he had pointed a gun at her without hesitation.
That kind of power was something to be wary of.
The two of them set off, walking side by side as they made their way through the wilderness. The cowboy led the way, his steps sure and steady, while the woman followed, keeping a careful distance. They didn't speak much, but the silence wasn't as uncomfortable as it had been the day before. It felt natural now, like the calm before a storm, or the quiet after a battle. It was a shared understanding between them that neither was ready to trust the other completely, but both were willing to move forward for now. As they walked, the woman couldn't help but observe the cowboy more closely, for his clothes were worn and weathered, just like hers. But there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of years of experience. He had the look of a man who had been through battles, both physical and emotional. His face, though rugged, was still youthful, but there was a hardness to his features that came with age and hardship. His dark eyes seemed to constantly scan their surroundings, alert to every sound, every movement. He was always on guard, always ready for whatever danger might come next. The woman, on the other hand, had a different way of moving through the world. She had learned to be stealthy, to avoid drawing attention. She was good at blending in, at becoming invisible when she needed to. It was a skill she had honed over the years, ever since she had begun running from her past. But now, walking beside the cowboy, she felt exposed in a way she hadn't before. There was no hiding when you were with someone like him. His presence made it impossible to ignore the reality of the world they were in. After a few hours of walking, they came across a small creek. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks was soothing, a rare comfort in such a harsh landscape. The cowboy stopped for a moment, motioning for the woman to do the same. "Let's take a break," he said, his voice low but firm. "We'll have some water, then keep moving." The woman nodded and knelt down beside the creek. She cupped her hands and drank from the cool, refreshing water, letting the chill of it soothe her dry throat. The cowboy didn't say anything as he drank from his canteen, but she could feel his eyes on her, as though he was watching her every move. She couldn't tell if it was suspicion or something else, but she knew that she had to keep her wits about her. "Yeah. So," she said after a moment, breaking the silence, "where are we headed?" The cowboy didn't answer immediately. He looked downstream for a moment, as if weighing the question, then turned to face her. "There's a town, a few days' ride from here," he said. "I've got business there." "You'll be safe once we get there." The woman frowned slightly. "Safe? Or are you just taking me there to hand me over to someone?" The cowboy's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment she saw a flicker of something in them. Anger, perhaps, or frustration. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I'm not handing you over to anyone," he said sharply. "I'm not that kind of man." She didn't say anything in response, but her skepticism was clear. But she had been handed over to too many people before, each time with promises of safety that never materialized. She wasn't ready to trust the cowboy just because he said so. His words didn't mean anything. Not yet. They stood up, and the cowboy began to pack up their things. The woman followed suit, picking up her small bundle and slinging it over her shoulder. It wasn't much, just a few belongings she had managed to carry with her. But it was all she had. The weight of it wasn't heavy, but it was a constant reminder of the life she had left behind. A life full of regret, of decisions made in desperation, of mistakes that had led her to this moment. They continued on their way, the sun climbing higher in the sky, and the day wore on in a slow, relentless march. The land around them was vast, and for the first time in a long while the woman felt a strange sense of both freedom and fear. The world seemed endless out here, and though she had been running from it for so long, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe this was where she was meant to be, or if this was where everything was about to change. As the day passed, the air grew hotter, and the cowboy's pace quickened. The woman kept up with him, her breath coming a little faster as the heat began to take its toll. The journey was starting to feel long and tiring, and she wondered how much longer they would have to walk before they reached the town. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what awaited them there, but she knew that there was no turning back now, for hours. As the sun began to set, the cowboy slowed his pace. He turned to her, his expression unreadable as usual. "We'll make camp here for the night," he said. The woman nodded, grateful for the rest. The cowboy set to work building a small fire, and the woman sat down nearby, pulling her knees up to her chest as she watched him. They didn't speak much, but the quiet was more comfortable now, less tense than before. It was as though they had found a small rhythm together, a kind of unspoken understanding. For the first time since they had met, the woman allowed herself to relax just a little. But she didn't know what the next day would bring, or what lay ahead on this strange journey with the cowboy. But for now, she was alive, and she had her wits about her, and that, she thought, was enough for the time being. The fire crackled in the cold evening air, its warmth a welcome relief after the long hours of walking. The cowboy had been unusually quiet that night, the only sounds being the soft rustling of the wind through the trees and the crackle of the flames. The woman sat a little distance away from him, her eyes fixed on the fire. She was tired, both physically and mentally, and the past few days had felt like a blur. It was as though time had slowed down, each minute dragging on longer than the last. The cowboy had been strangely distant since their conversation by the creek, and the woman couldn't help but wonder why. She knew he was hiding something about why he had taken her with him, and she was determined to find out what it was, but she wasn't sure how to approach him. She didn't want to push too hard, but she couldn't keep walking blindly into the unknown either. She shifted her position slightly, trying to get comfortable on the hard ground. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, each one coming faster than the last. She had been running for so long, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the next threat to find her. But now, with the cowboy at her side, things were different. She was still running, but now she wasn't alone. Rest, and that was a strange feeling. For the first time in a long while, she found herself wondering if she could trust someone again. The fire flickered, casting shadows across the ground, and the woman's mind wandered back to her past. She thought about the life she had left behind, the people she had known, the choices she had made. There were so many things she regretted, so many mistakes she wished she could undo. But the past couldn't be changed, no matter how much she wished otherwise. All she could do now was keep moving forward, one step at a time. "You didn't say much today," the woman finally said, her voice breaking the silence. "Respect."
"What's on your mind?" The cowboy didn't respond right away. He continued to tend the fire, poking at the logs with a stick.
He seemed lost in thought, his face shadowed by the flickering light. "I've got a lot on my mind," he said quietly after a moment.
"Best. Things I've been carrying for a long time." The woman watched him carefully, her curiosity piqued. She wanted to ask more, but she held back.
But she wasn't sure if he was ready to talk, but the fact that he had spoken at all was a small victory.
"Like what?" she asked gently, her voice soft but sincere.
The cowboy hesitated, his hand stilling over the fire.
He looked at her for the first time that night, his dark eyes meeting hers.
There was something in his gaze, something deep and guarded, that made her hold her breath. For a brief moment she saw a flicker of vulnerability in him, and it surprised her. She hadn't expected him to open up, especially not to her.
"I've made my share of mistakes," he said, his voice low and rough.
Things I can't take back. The woman remained silent, sensing that he was struggling to find the words. She had learned that sometimes silence was the best response, that forcing someone to talk only made them retreat further into themselves. So she waited, letting him speak when he was ready. "I've spent most of my life trying to make up for those mistakes," he continued, his eyes fixed on the fire again. "But no matter how hard I try, it never feels like enough." The woman's heart softened. She didn't know what he had done, but she could hear the regret in his voice, the weight of years of guilt. It was a feeling she understood all too well. She had made her own mistakes, done things she wasn't proud of, and she had been running ever since, hoping to outrun the consequences. But "You don't have to make up for everything," she said quietly. "Sometimes you just have to keep moving forward." The cowboy didn't answer right away, but she could tell he was thinking about her words. There was a long pause, and for a moment it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Finally he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper.
"I'm not sure how much further I can go." The woman felt a pang of sympathy for him, though she didn't fully understand what he meant.
She wanted to ask more, to push for answers, but she knew better than to ask too many questions. He wasn't ready to share everything, and that was okay. He had his own burdens to carry, just as she did. "Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here, for as long as I'm with you." The cowboy glanced at her again, his expression unreadable. For a moment it felt like he was about to say something else, but then he looked away, his gaze returning to the fire. The conversation seemed to end there, and they both fell into a quiet, thoughtful silence. The woman leaned back, her eyes drifting toward the sky. The stars were beginning to appear, one by one, as the night deepened. It was a beautiful sight, one she hadn't taken the time to appreciate in a long time. Out here, away from everything, the world seemed simpler, more raw. The vastness of the sky reminded her that there was so much more to life than the small, painful corner she had been hiding in. She wasn't sure where the road would take her, but she knew that for now she had to stay focused. She couldn't afford to get lost in the past. After a while, the cowboy stood up and stretched, his muscles stiff from sitting by the fire. "We'll leave early tomorrow," he said. "It's going to be a long day."
The woman nodded, knowing he was right.
They had to keep moving. The road wasn't kind to those who lingered too long in one place. They couldn't afford to rest for too long, not when there were dangers around every corner. "Got it," she said simply, standing up as well. The cowboy began to gather his things, and the woman did the same. She didn't need to ask where they were going next. She knew the answer. Forward. They would keep moving, one step at a time, until they reached whatever destination awaited them.
She wasn't sure what that destination was yet, but she was willing to find out.
For now they had this moment, this brief pause in the chaos of their lives, and that was enough. As they prepared for the night, the woman felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure how long this uneasy partnership with the cowboy would last, but for the first time in a while she wasn't so sure that the road ahead was a dead end. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new. The fire flickered one last time before it died down, leaving only the embers glowing in the dark. The woman and the cowboy sat in the quiet of the night, each lost in their own thoughts, but connected by the road they shared. They didn't need to say anything more, for now their silence spoke louder than any words could. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting the land in soft shades of pink and gold. The air was cool and still, and the woman awoke to the quiet sound of the cowboy already moving around the camp. The fire from the previous night had burned down to a few glowing embers, and the sky above was clear with only a few clouds scattered across it. She sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in her limbs from the long days of travel. Her muscles ached, but there was something invigorating about the stillness of the morning. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something, and she couldn't help but wonder if today would be the day. Things finally changed for them. The cowboy was already packing up his things, moving with practiced efficiency. He hadn't said much the night before, but his actions spoke volumes. He was always preparing for something, whether it was a fight, a journey, or just the unknown. She couldn't decide if it was that constant readiness that made him more dangerous or if it was the quiet way he carried his burden. As the woman stretched, she glanced over at him, her mind racing with questions. Just two shays walking beside him, trying to piece together the story he wasn't ready to tell. She knew he had his reasons for taking her with him, for being so guarded and distant, but she couldn't help but wonder what had brought him to this point. Was he trying to save her, or was she just another person he had decided to help? Or maybe, in his own way, he was trying to save himself. The silence between them had become more comfortable over the days, but it was still filled with things unspoken. They both carried their own burdens, their own histories. The woman couldn't tell if the cowboy saw her as a companion or just a means to an end. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't as worried about where their path would lead. She was more focused on the journey itself, on what they might learn about each other along the way. As she gathered her belongings, she noticed the cowboy glance over at her for a brief moment. His expression was unreadable, as always, but she felt a shift in the air between them. He had been avoiding her gaze for days, but now he seemed to be watching her more closely. She couldn't tell if it was suspicion or something else, but the quiet exchange made her feel both seen and still unseen. "You ready?" the cowboy asked, his voice low but with an edge of something that almost sounded like concern. She nodded, keeping her gaze steady on him. "Ready." The cowboy gave a small nod and began leading the way. The morning light lit up the path ahead, and the two of them set off once again, walking in the direction he had pointed to the night before. The land stretched out before them, vast, open, and endless. The woman couldn't help but feel a sense of both freedom and loneliness in the empty landscape. They were alone, with only each other for company, and yet the world felt as though it was closing in on them, pushing them forward whether they were ready or not. The silence between them was broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional distant call of a bird, or the rustle of wind through the dry grass. For a time they walked in step with one another, each of them lost in their own thoughts, but oddly connected in the rhythm of their movement.
The cowboy didn't speak much during the morning hours. His focus set on the path ahead.
The woman, for once, didn't feel the need to fill the silence. She had come to understand that sometimes there were no words needed. Sometimes it was enough to just walk beside someone, sharing the same air, the same world, and letting the quiet bond them. By midday the sun had risen high, and the heat began to settle in. The air was thick with dust and dry heat, and the land seemed to shimmer under the oppressive sun. The woman wiped her brow with the back of her hand, trying to stay cool, but the heat was relentless. The cowboy didn't stop, though. He just kept moving, leading the way without so much as a glance at her. She could feel the tension growing between them, the unspoken questions that hung in the air. They were getting closer to something. She wasn't sure what, but she knew the journey had to end somewhere. And as much as she had tried to push those thoughts aside, she couldn't help but wonder if they were both running toward something or if they were just running away from whatever they feared most. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge that overlooked a small valley below. The land spread out before them, a patchwork of dirt and scrub, with a few scattered trees and a trickling creek running through the middle. It was a peaceful scene, a contrast to the tension that hung between the cowboy and the woman. The cowboy stopped at the top of the ridge and looked down into the valley, his hand resting on the hilt of his gun. He seemed lost in thought, and for a moment the woman felt the urge to ask him where they were going. But she held back. She knew it wasn't time. He wasn't ready to talk yet. After a long pause, the cowboy spoke. "This is it," he said quietly, his voice soft but final. The woman turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat. She didn't know what to expect, but she had an uneasy feeling in her chest. This was the moment. She could feel it. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The cowboy didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the valley below, his face unreadable. Finally, he turned to her, and for the first time since they had met, she saw something else in his eyes. It was a flicker of something human, something that reminded her that, despite everything, he wasn't just the stranger who had pointed a gun at her. He was a man, like her, with his own story, his own pain, and his own reasons for being out here. "This is where we part ways," he said, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it that made her heart race. She blinked, unable to process his words at first. "What do you mean?" The cowboy looked at her, his expression softening just slightly. "I'm not the one you should be running from anymore." "You're safe here, but you need to move on."
I've done what I needed to do.
The woman stood there, frozen, her mind racing. You're letting me go?" He nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile crossing his face. "You've got your own path to follow. I've led you far enough." Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to find the words. This wasn't what she had expected. She had thought he would keep her under his control, keep her walking by his side, forcing her down a road she didn't want to travel. But now, with his words, she realized that he had been guiding her for a reason. Perhaps to give her the chance to make her own choice, to find her own way. The weight of his words sank in, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known she still had. "You're not coming with me?" she asked softly, her voice breaking. "No," he said, shaking his head. "But you can do this." Desperate. "You don't need me to carry you anymore." The woman stood there for a long moment, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't quite understand. There was relief, but also uncertainty, around. She had spent so much time running, so much time following others, that now she wasn't sure what to do next. But one thing was clear. The cowboy had given her something she hadn't realized she needed, an opportunity to choose her own path. She looked down into the valley below, the world wide open before her. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like her own. As she turned to the cowboy, who was already turning away, preparing to leave. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. The cowboy didn't reply, but as he walked away she saw him pause for a moment, looking back at her. And then, without another word, he disappeared into the distance. For the first time in years, the woman stood alone, free to follow whatever path she chose,